Okay, guys, thanks very much for coming along on to my talk. I'm Lucy Mancey, and today I'm going to be talking about the lost art of packing. If my remote works. Are we going to work? Ah, there we go. So, the lost art of packing. The aim of today's talk is to explore the culture of packing in British skydiving, to give you a more in-depth understanding of your kit, how it's designed to work, factors that affect the quality of your openings, and good packing practices. So after the presentation, I'll be giving a packing demonstration and covering some of the things I'm talking about. So, first of all, the obligatory About Me session. So I started skydiving with a tandem at Dunkerswell that my boyfriend brought me back in 2000. And then I went out to Australia and I did my AFF. Part of the AFF course in Australia, you had to do your packing certificate as well. So I learnt to pack really early on. In fact, I packed almost every single of the parachutes that I've ever jumped, apart from the first one that was a tandem. I soon found I actually really loved packing. And the bonus side was I could earn jump money too. So it was a win-win. Anyway, the boyfriend then became the husband, and for years in the sport, I've probably most commonly been known as Ryan's wife. My husband's here today. He's actually giving a talk this afternoon, so I hope some of you will go along and watch that. We have a son, Forrester. He's now 14 years old, definitely teaching me new levels of patience. I also run a tunnel flying club, which I recently set up. It's another passion of mine, and if you have got any interest or questions, please come and talk to me about this later, specifically for children with additional needs and sensory issues. Working with people with additional needs and obviously raising our son has given me a very different insight into the different ways in which people learn, and I think that's really helped me with some of the ways I teach with my packing as well. I love skydiving. The last year I've really got into competing, did the indoor nationals, did the pops, and did the 8-way nationals, and carrying on with the 8-way this year, which I'm really excited about. And see some of my teammates in the audience. Hi, guys! Although I've been packing mains for over 20 years, I more recently, in the last sort of 6-7 years, got into doing the reserves, and I'm working towards my rigger rating at the moment. If you are interested in becoming a rigger or knowing anything about that, Mary Barrett will be giving a talk straight after this one, so I do implore you to go along and watch that. Anyway, back to the packing. But why is it lost, I hear you ask? So this is all my personal opinion and my experiences, but I really feel there's a severe lack of gear knowledge in the sport right now, and an enthusiasm for packing that just doesn't seem to be there. Now, I'm not trying to point blame or say that there's a lot, most packers are rubbish, but the reality is there is still a lot of bad packing out there. I need that. I still find questionable things on a regular basis. Can I have a hands up of everyone here who can pack? And how many of you regularly pack for yourselves? And do you all have packing certificates? Yeah? So within the British skydiving system, there's actually no requirement to have a packing certificate unless you pack for others. But I thought we could look at some of the reasons why people don't pack for themselves. So can anyone give me a reason why you don't pack? Lazy. Anyone else? Any more? Yeah. So a lot of these reasons already got up. So obviously, you don't know how to pack. That's one reason. You don't have time before the next load. Maybe you can afford not to have to bother, a situation a lot of us would much rather be in. You've got a new canopy and you just can't get it in the bag. People keep offering to do it for you. Trust me, I have been there. I have seen some people packing and I've just had to step in and say, oh God, let me do it, please. You might have a physical difficulty, which means packing for yourself is not accessible. Or peer pressure. And now this is an interesting one. Often when people are learning to pack, or they've recently got their certificates, they might get comments about, oh, you're really slow, aren't you? Are you sure you're going to make the next load? And what then does, those people then feel pressured to use the packers, and then after a while they stop trying and they lose the confidence, and then they might not, they might have a packing certificate but just might not feel confident about packing for themselves. And this is something I'm really passionate about. I think we should be encouraging people to pack more. It's not that hard and it's not as scary as you think. So we've established that some of you would rather not pack for yourselves and entrust your lives to somebody else. But aside from blind trust, how can we be certain that the local DZ packer is any good? I mean, they must have a packing certificate, right? But ultimately, we have to trust that our packers have been trained up well and they pack safely for us. In most aspects of this sport, we have some sort of formal training or continued professional development. But on the packing side of things, there's no set training course, and a lot of it is left open to interpretation of the British skydiving regulations, rules, manufacturer's instructions, and recommendations. We have the information in the ops manual, which basically says from B licence onwards, the packing of the main parachute is our responsibility. And in order to get a B licence, we only need a packing brief. But why stop there? You know, why are people not getting their packing certificates earlier than that? The British Skydiving Form 197 guidelines, these are actually all of the requirements in the training syllabus for you to have your packing certificate. So you should be able to assemble all the main parts, 3 rings. Some of you, I hope, will come over and have a go at a little competition. Remove slinks, links, RSL, remove the bridle, D-bag, pilot chute. But a lot of people I've talked to either weren't taught all of this stuff, or they couldn't remember being taught it, or they weren't even aware that they should have been. And I'm not judging, it is merely an observation. But last year when we did the competition on the Romex stand for the fastest time doing the 3 rings, it became apparent that a lot of people couldn't do it, even though they had packing certificates. And it got me thinking along the lines of why is that? And that kind of started this long journey into writing this talk today. So, normalization of deviance. Have any of you heard of this term before? I'm guessing a lot of the military people will have. So one interpretation of this is the gradual process through which unacceptable practice or standards become acceptable. As the deviant behaviour is repeated without catastrophic results, it becomes the social norm. So why is any of this relevant? Packing is full of these. For example, when the Sabre 1 came out, it was Performance Design's first ZP canopy, and it was probably only about the second ZP canopy on the market. So up until then, packing instructions were geared towards the older F111 style. The Sabre 1 then became quite commonly known for the hard openings, and packers started to try and devise different ways of packing the main to mitigate this. You know, they'd roll the nose in various configurations, they'd try different sliders, things like that. Now, these deviations from the normal way of packing then just became standard practice. And over the years, as new canopies have come out, you know, they've then been required to change and do something again. It becomes a new norm. And so why is any of this relevant? People will say that there's no one way to pack. And, you know, that is very, very true. Everyone has their own special way of doing certain things. But do they all know why they do them? Are they potentially doing something that's one deviation away from being a potential malfunction? Ultimately, we want to make sure that we're packing safely and not deviating too far from the path, or if we are, knowing exactly why we're doing that. I thought we'd just have a quick look at the malfunction stats for the last few years. And as you can see, the numbers actually come down, which is great. We'd rather have no numbers, but we're only seeing part of the picture because what gets reported on is only actual malfunctions, deployment problems that get reported British Skydiving. We don't know how many bad openings people are having, how many off-heading openings. And why do we care about that? You know, a bad opening or an off-heading opening might only be a minor nuisance to some, but when you're starting to move towards doing big ways and you're jumping with more people, or you're moving along in your canopy progression and you moved on to a more high-performance canopy, these minor nuisances then have the potential to become a much bigger problem or a potential malfunction. One drop, so my husband questioned one of the packers there after a spate of really, really bad openings, and the comment he was met with was, "You paid for the pack job, not the opening." I have some examples. Oh, is this going to play? Okay. Any of these look familiar? Frozen, or if that was the end of the video. So all of these malfunctions and deployment problems could probably have been prevented by good packing and better care of their equipment. Bill Booth from UPT gave a talk a few years ago, and there was a little excerpt in his talk, which when I was researching this one, he just said something which I've been saying for years, and I thought it was quite poignant, so I'm just going to play that now.
Booth's law number 2. The safer skydiving gets, the more risk jumpers will take to keep the fatality rate level. It's true. So what can you do to outwit Booth's law and prove me wrong? 4 things. Learn how your gear works. The average person can't hook up a 3-ring anymore. Practice emergency procedures often, every 30 days. Use an AAD and set it 100 feet higher, and use an RSL, preferably a MARD. Now,
so, as Bill Booth just stated, knowing our gear is important in keeping us safe. And when we talk about our gear and equipment and your rig, what do we actually mean? So, you have a container and a harness system. What does that comprise of? Can anyone tell me? What comes with your harness system? I'll start you off. Oh. Risers. Oh, I put the picture up now. All that lot. So when you buy a container, either brand new or second hand, it should comprise of the risers, the deployment bag or D-bag, the pilot chute, the bridle, the reserve free bag and pilot chute, and an RSL and a MARD. Anybody know what MARD stands for? Excellent. Most people commonly heard of things like the Skyhook. That is a type of MARD system. Other MARD systems are available. You'll also have an AAD. Oh, main activated reserve deployment, in case you guys didn't hear that down the front. That's what MARD stands for. So they shouted it down there. Where are you with the mic? Not doing your job, Joanne. You'll also have your 2 canopies, main, reserve, and the canopies should come with some sort of connector links, slinks, Malon, Rapid link. I keep saying Malion and getting told off. So, I've already lost where I was. So personally, I think anyone who's skydiving should have better gear knowledge. They should know what their equipment comprises of. And especially when we start looking about the importance of compatibility of equipment. Is your deployment bag the right size for your rig? And container, is the pilot chute the right size for the type of flying you're doing in the canopy? I've seen canopies bought and sold with the D-bags and pilot chutes still attached because people think they stay with the canopy, and that's not the case, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. So, controllable factors. These are all the things that, even before you've packed the parachute, can have an influence on the outcome of what that is like. A few years ago, some of you might remember a talk by John LeBlanc from Performance Designs. He gave a talk on how to avoid hard openings. This subject matter is worthy of an entire talk itself, so I'm just going to touch on it, but obviously I've referenced that in this. So as we just touched on the compatibility of your equipment and why is that important, as we said, the bag is manufactured for the container, not the size of the canopy. Manufacturers will give you a list on their website of compatible canopies for the size of the bag and equipment that you have. If the bag is too small for the container or the canopy isn't filling out the bag properly, it will have an influence on the sequence of the deployment. Equally, if the canopy is too big for the bag or the bag is too big for the container, it's going to cause you problems too. The size, material and condition of your pilot chute is another factor that's going to affect how your parachute opens. Does anyone know what size their pilot chute is? Do you know what it's made from? Oh, sorry, Mike knows what size his pilot chute is. So all of these factors can affect the opening, but also it's a really overlooked piece of equipment, your pilot chute. If it's too big for the quit you're jumping, you know, you're going to have a harder opening. It's going to pull everything out quicker. If it's too small, it might not pull it out at all. You know, you might get a total bag lock or pilot chute in tow. If the kill line has shrunk or if the kill line is too long, it'll distort the shape of the pilot chute so it won't catch air as effectively, which will adversely affect the opening of the canopy as well. The method with which we deploy our canopy, we've got obviously standard pilot chute throw out. Does anyone know any other methods of deployment? Down the back there? Yeah, so we've got pin pull, we've got leg strap throwaway. Any other ones? So, I mean, some of you, when you were doing back in your student days, you would have ripcord. Another deployment type. Now, this is an interesting one, and I didn't necessarily know this until I started researching, but did you know your riser covers are designed to aid in the deployment of your canopy? Ideally, the riser covers should be open before the canopy comes out of the bag. If your riser covers are too tight and your canopy's already out of the bag by the time they then open, you'll end up with a bit of slack and you'll get this snatch effect and you'll get that pull and a bit more of a hard opening. Check your riser covers, people. Slider, again, we've spoken about the slider, the size, material of the slider. Slider's probably more important in terms of how we pack it in the canopy as well, and I'll be demonstrating that in a moment. Line types. Can anyone tell me some line types? Yeah. Dacron. HMA. Spectre. And do we have Vectrin? Yeah. I mean, there's loads of stuff we could talk about lines, and I won't go into in depth, but obviously if they look like this, change them. When I started packing out in Australia, and I was very low experience, and I was packing for one of the instructors there, and I picked up his kit, and I had a look at the lines, and I was like, are these any good? And he's like, yeah, I jump at the coast, they're fine. And I wasn't experienced enough to know that he really shouldn't have been jumping that kit, and I didn't know the rigger had actually told him they should not be jumped and they should be replaced. And unfortunately, because he didn't follow the advice, he had a brake line snap as he was coming into land, and he did not make it to the hospital that day. That really stuck with me. I was just learning to pack and stuff then, and it just made me really determined to know more about my equipment and not take chances with my life like that. Line stows and bungees. So line stows, the length of them, the tightness of the bungees, the type of bungees we use. Are they single stowed? Are they double stowed? Again, the way you stow your lines is going to have an effect on the opening of the canopy. Oh, are we? Hang on a sec. Oh, there we go. And not one we think about when it comes to packing, but our body position, our airspeed. You know, we know we're meant to turn, track, wave off and be level and stable when we pull, but how many people actually stop to think about how much they've stopped their forward momentum? Are their shoulders perfectly level as they're deploying? You know, or are you looking over your shoulder and then looking up at your canopy as it opens? All of this is going to affect how your parachute opens. I knew a jumper once who was constantly complaining of hard openings. Everyone had tried to pack her parachute for her, and nothing seemed to be making a difference. And I'm stood there chatting to her, and she's rubbing her chest and shoulders, and she's like, oh, I'm really sore. And it wasn't until she did that we realised she was basically just dumping in a track. As soon as we reminded her to wash the speed off and stop, her openings improved vastly. Something Brian Germain said to me was the single most important insight into his body position and things when the canopy's opening is to push the risers apart during the snivel phase of the canopy opening, and that really reduced the risk of line twists. For those of you who don't know Brian Germain, he's an author of several books, The Canopy and His Pilot. He also has a company, Big Air Sports, and they manufacture canopies, so he really does know his stuff. And ultimately, the method and quality of our packing. And here's one I prepared earlier for you. So I thought we'd just take a look at a parachute opening seeing as we're talking about it. Is this going to play? And it does just play again in slow-mo. So it's a nice example of the deployment sequence where the pilot chutes, caught the airflow, deployment bags come out the container, the lines are paying out nice and evenly. You can see the air hitting the slider. The air is now being diverted around the slider into the parachute. The nose cells are starting to inflate. The air is going across those cross-port vents and eventually filling up the whole canopy. And it's not until that air's got all the way across there that the slider's going to come down the lines. What's interesting when you see it played this slow is how much tension that slider puts on those outside lines as it's opening. I mean, this is slowed down and this is a really slow opening, but you can imagine with a very fast opening how much stress and strain on those outside lines. Also explains why there's so much friction on them and why canopies go out of trim. So when we talk about a canopy going out of trim, it's when those outside lines have started to shrink and it changes the planform shape of the canopy and it will start to affect the way it flies. You probably wouldn't notice it on a bigger canopy, but on smaller canopies it's much more obvious. If only they were all that slow. So there was a quote I got from a guy called Lou Sanborn. He's the USPAD license #1. And the full quote actually says, as he points to his canopy, treat this like garbage and these like gold. I wouldn't recommend treating the canopy like garbage, but definitely treat your lines like gold. They are important. So in a minute, I'm going to demonstrate some packing for you. I'm going to demonstrate a Pro Pack. Now, does anyone know what the Pro in Pro Pack stands for? Anyone? Proper ram air orientation. See, you all learned something new today. So in conclusion to this part of our talk, know your gear. If you do not know something, ask questions, preferably to the right people, not on the Beginner Skydive forum on Facebook. Treat your life-saving device kit like it is going to save your life. Don't drag it around the landing area in the packing hall. Don't sit on it. Encourage those who are learning and struggling. And be nice to your packers. And I just want to say thank you to some of the guys who helped contribute to some of my research. So we've got John LeBlanc from Performance Designs, Brian Germain from Big Air Sports, and Derek Thomas from Elite Rigging Academy, formerly Sunpath owner. Right, so I'm going to move on to the packing bit. So if any of you want to move down and cram in and around, you won't need to see the screen.
Which way are you going? Are you going to bring that this way or that way?
I'll maybe just kind of drag it into the middle.
I'm going to stay where I am then. Good to see you. He's here as well. They're still doing fun jumps? Yeah. Jason's still in charge? Yeah, he is, yeah. Yeah, the last time I thought about it, somebody said, don't bother it. Let's do it.
Right, so I've not got time to give you guys a pack teaching lesson today. This is going to be a demonstration. If there is anything that anyone has any questions about afterwards, please come and chat to me after the talk. They won't let me monopolise this room all day. So, first thing I want to talk about, untwist your brake lines, people. Hands up who untwists their brake lines on a regular basis. Yeah? Clive, I've packed your main several times. That is a lie. Why is it important to untwist our brake lines? Yeah, so if you're allowing your brake lines to regularly twist up, not only are you running the risk of tension knots when they start to sort of crumple all together, and I did put a picture on the screen earlier of a really bad case I saw come in, but eventually it does start to affect the lines. You're putting far more pressure on the bits of the line, and there's more chance of them getting worn out quicker as well. It is not good for the lifespan of your lines to allow your brake lines to regularly get that twisted up. Get in a regular habit of untwisting them. When you land, even if you don't set your brakes in the landing area, stick your toggles back in. So first thing we're going to do is untwist our brake lines. You can do that side for me. And if anyone doesn't know how to untwist brake lines, the best thing to do is start at the canopy end. Just sandwich the lines between your fingers and run it down. Now, I appreciate that you're not going to have time to do this on every single jump. It's, you know, it does get busy when we're jumping lots, but if you can do it maybe at the last pack job of the day and get into a regular habit of that, it's much better than just not at all. How you doing? Doesn't have to be perfect, no pressure, no one's watching. So when it comes to stowing your brakes, obviously depending on what kit you've got, it's going to depend what toggles you've got, what stowing method. So I'm not really going to go into a great bit of detail on that because it is very manufacturer specific. But needless to say, make sure your brakes are set to the manufacturer's recommendations of the equipment you have. Make sure your excess is stowed properly in whatever method of stowing your rig happens to have. I do always recommend you stow down, not up, because it's more likely to bunch up if you're trying to pull your toggle that way and the lines have got to come out and up and around. So I always stow, if everyone can see here, brake lines in that way. You done? Yeah, so, yeah, that's fine. And then when you tuck it into the keepers, some people go like that way, and it's just a chance of it getting caught, plus it damages the little keepers more often than not. Now you might see I've got my rig on a little packing mat here today. These are a very underused bit of kit. These used to be really popular years ago, and I never see them anymore. People just drag their rigs around. But yeah, these are really handy, and they're not super expensive, but they're great for protecting your kit, and especially if you've got to pack outside somewhere. Some of them come with a little cover which will just, protect it from the sun. Remember, treat your life-saving device like it's going to save your life. But also, when you're packing your rig and you're getting it set up, spend a bit of time just getting it set up. The main principles of packing, if you break it all down, is line tension and symmetry. If we can just keep that in our heads as we're working, so keep your risers symmetrical, and there we go, and keep it under tension. I know some people can pack without a weight, but if you don't, if you can use a weight, it's great because you've got that little bit of pressure, you can keep it under tension. Yeah, come on that side. Now, when I'm packing, I like to just go back to my lines and just check where I'm at with my symmetry. Easy way to do that is just look at where the cascades are, and then you can just line them up. You might need to tweak it. You might have been talking and waffling and wander off to the side and on a bit of an angle, so just wander back a bit. But it's just all these little tiny things just make a difference. You ready for the choo-choo train bit? I always think this bit sounds like a choo-choo train, and I can't get it out of my head now. So I find my nose cells. You're never going to not hear that when you pack now. Oh, I missed one. And, I mean, you see people give it a massive shake. The reason I'm doing this is I'm just making sure that there's nothing really caught in it. You know, make sure my pilot chute's not banged around it. Give it a little shake. And you can even at this point just grab your lines here and then shove it between your legs. One shoulders, two shoulders, doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with. I've always only ever done it over one shoulder. I've got this nifty line separating device here. And pilots are great, they're colour coded. It's such a good idea, but it's also handy when I'm showing people. So, I mean, if you know how to pack, you know how to flake a canopy. Essentially, all we're trying to do is keep our lines in the middle and our parachute fabric out to the side. So I'm just going to go through my line groups. And I've only got little arms, so I shove my arm in there and just give it a little flick, because it's a bigger canopy than my arm is. So. And while I'm doing my flaking of the canopy, I do just tend to grab the rest of my lines. Maybe it's because I'm a reserve packer and I'm used to keeping my lines in the middle more than anyone else, but I just find it helps keep everything together and a little bit neater. And obviously I'm going a little bit quicker today because I've only got so much time, but you know, take your time over this bit if you want. I mean, if you're learning, it can sometimes help to get into the habit of counting cells and counting lines, especially if they're not colour-coded, so you know exactly where you're at with what line groups. But there we go. Now, the slider. Many years ago, random different things were done with sliders. There'd be everything tucked in, they'd be pulled out one way, pulled out another way. There's been a lot of research. I mean, PD have started putting their poppers on their sliders to hold them in a certain place, and I'm fairly certain they've done a lot of research. But this is the way I do my slider. I've pretty much always done it this way. Everyone else seems to be cottoning on that this is a good way to do sliders. You saw in the video that airflow needs to hit that slider. If we can make sure that that slider is available for the airflow, then that is going to aid in the sequence of the deployment. But more importantly, the slider grommets need to be down on the line bumps. That is important. And we want to make sure the apex of our slider is far down into our pack job. So when we come to the folding sequence and the bagging sequence, that will also aid in holding our slider against the line bumps, and that's certainly going to help with a better opening. So quarter your slider by all means, but also make sure that it's available at the front and at the back. And then once I've made sure that my slider is oriented where I want it to, I'm then going to go back in and push that apex right down into the pack job. A lot of modern canopies, you don't need to do anything with the nose. What I tend to do with the nose is just sort of push it in so it's flush, but not shove it in and shake it and have lines go around everywhere. Remember, I want my lines in the middle, I want that symmetry on both sides, and I want that tension to keep this pack job nice. So, you know, spend a bit of time neatening it up. The stabilisers on the sides of your canopy, I just kind of like fold them just forwards, but I make sure the slider's on top of that. Oh, I've gone a bit wonky. I have, haven't I? I've only got little arms. You've got to devise a way of getting the rest of it. Do a little bow. And then obviously we've just worked hard to put all these nice folds and our lines in the middle. So when you are wrapping the tail around, I use a knee just to hold it where I just folded it. Don't pull your tail around too quick or too hard, because you will force that pack job to just kind of unfurl. So the little knee trick just helps keep it there. And when it comes to rolling the tail, again, we're going for symmetry. If you can line up the seams on your tail, and you just 2 or 3 folds just to lock it off tight. Maybe 2 at the top, 3 at the bottom, and just hold that down. Now, I will never understand. I see this so often. People stood there, they spend half an hour doing the most beautiful folds, and then they pick it up and they just throw it at the ground from like waist height. This thing goes boof. Honestly, I do not know why people do that. So, Ryan, if you just want to shift. You know, if you're struggling to get it to the ground, like, just do a little run. You know, get your arm underneath it and just gently lay it down. It doesn't have to be hard. Oh, do you know what? I haven't done that yet. I hate packing shoes. I was trying to find some funky socks. I couldn't find my unicorn ones. So when we've got the canopy on the ground, obviously we want to maintain our line tension, our symmetry that we've talked about. We also want to do a quick check to make sure that anything inside our pack job hasn't started to spread. So the first thing I do is I'm just going to have a little feel around the sides, and I'm just going to kind of gather it towards the centre a little bit more. I'm not pushing or tucking, I'm not folding everything underneath, I'm literally gathering back in. Because then I just want to tease out the top skin of the canopy, because it's only the tail, the top skin here, that I'm using to wrap it and make it into a little sausage. And all the while I've got my knees still on the label part, because I want to try and keep that line tension that I've got going on behind me. And I know there's lots of people out there who don't like packing, but I quite enjoy this bit. Like, you know, you've just done a jump. It was pretty stressful. It might have been amazing. You just lie here and have a little rest. Just decompress for a moment. Think about how awesome the next jump's going to be. Or in a busy packing room, you just lie here and people watch for a bit. It's nice. Yeah, let's have a little chat. But also while I'm down here, I'm going to have a quick look at my bag. You know, if I was clever, I probably would have cocked it before I lay down on the floor. But I'm just going to check if everything's good. How's my kill line doing? Might just see if there's any bungees need replacing. Things like that. Could you do me a small favour there, sir? I mean, I was holding the bag for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you kindly. Excellent. So now I've got the air at my canopy, I've had a little rest, I've got my bag ready. Now it's time to sort of get it into a shape and size that we can easily get it in the bag. So, again, I'm just gathering and wrapping. I'm just going down one side and just down the other side. And I'm not going to make too big a deal of it at this point, because I'm going to get back up and start doing folds. Now, I know there are some people out there who will bag a canopy tail first. I'm not a fan of teaching that technique. I think if you know how to do that technique and you can maintain control of your pack job whilst doing that technique, that's great. If you're good at it, crack on. But when I'm teaching people and when they're learning, because as I've said, it's important that we keep this line tension, we keep all these nice important bits up here that we've just folded, the tension on our slider, we want to keep that under tension. So that's why I prefer to do this S-fold first. I'm not saying the other way is wrong. Some manufacturers and canopy manufacturers have it in their manual. It's just personal preference at this point, and this is what I always teach. And I think it's easier. So I've got one hand underneath, one hand on top, and as I lift, I'm going to slide it whilst keeping that tension. So again, I'm still keeping that slider nice butted up against the line stops, and I've got my folds nice in there. And then just put your knees on it. It does become a bit of a fine art when you're packing it, and this is quite an old canopy. I would have equally have been happy to demonstrate on a brand new one, but I didn't have one. If anyone wants to give me a brand new canopy to demonstrate packing demonstrations with, I wouldn't complain. There is a fine art to knowing how much pressure you can put on the canopy, how much control you need to have. But I will say, take a breather, don't stress. the stressed you get, the sweat you're going to get, the more it's going to feel hard. Like, there are some really, really good techniques for getting it in the bag. This is one I use quite a lot, and this is one I teach. So if you do have any questions about this, please come and see me afterwards. So I just might trim the sides here, just tuck them in a bit more to go to the width of my bag. I'm then just going to gather this last bit, and I'm going to fold it back. So I'm just going to put my hands where my knees are. I'm going to move my knees back so that the canopy can't slide backwards, because I want to keep that line tension. And I'm not going to worry about this bit, because this bit's just canopy and doesn't have lines in, and we don't mind what happens to that in a minute. Because I have small hands and I can't just pick up the whole thing and shove it all in, I've just learnt to pack with my body. Whatever works for you, this works for me. And I'm just going to use my body weight just to hold that, and then I can get an arm under there. I can get the lid of the bag, and I can stick that on my knees, and then I've got something I can push in against. And then I'm just taking these folds here and putting them in the bottom corners. And you can actually get your thumb in that fold there and get it right into the back of our bag there. Same on that side. I mean, obviously I've got small hands, a bit easier. And there we go, it's in the bag. So this is the point where people start to get a little bit, oh my God, and they'll sweat and they'll panic and they're like, I was never going to go in, oh, I'll just give up. But it's in the bag. Like, this is just fluff. Don't worry about the fluffy bits. You know, again, we're looking at our symmetry, so we want to make sure the apex of our canopy is lined up with the middle of our bag. But then I'm just going to take these bits, I'm going to gather them. I'm using the top skin just to sort of suck them in a bit, and then just tuck. Same on this side. Get a bit of air out. And this technique works on brand new canopies, trust me. All the while, my knees are on the lid of the bag. I'm stopping the bottom half of the canopy and the first S-folds from coming out. Because what we don't want to be doing is having, as we push this in, everything else coming out, and then having to kind of panic stuff. Yeah, you'll probably get away with it, it'll probably work, but ultimately, that's not what we're aiming for. So now, I can come to the side, lift my bag up, and everything's nicely in there. Now, again, use what you've got available, use your body, and we're going to get our line stows in. Always take the lid of the bag to the bungee, not the bungee to the lid of the bag. Why is that important? Because when that bungee snaps across your inside of your thigh, it really hurts. Oh, they've already filmed the packing bit yesterday. Come on down, guys. Come on, scooch on down. Oh, they've actually got a monitor back there. It's in the bag.
The lines, are they inside the... Thank you, they're inside the canopy, yeah.
Sometimes you'll finish at this bit and that'll be like that. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with tucking it in, but what I want people to be aware of is what we talked about with the slider placement and keeping that tension. So just kind of gently sandwich it and snuggle it back in there. Try not to sort of push and shove, and because then we start to undo all the good work we did earlier on in our pack job. And this is the important bit here. But I think people all too often get focused on getting the tail in the bag because that seems like a bigger problem. But actually...
What I couldn't see why I was asking, I couldn't see that first bunch of lines was against the bag or inside in the folds of the canopy.
Inside, because I've done a standard S-fold,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's in the middle as it...
Yeah, I couldn't see it properly when you had your knees on it and you were doing it. Thank you.
So, line stows. Now, they've done a lot of research on this, and ultimately, your line stows should be tight. Your mouth lock stows should take at least 8 to 12 pounds of pressure to get out. How much pressure is that? I do not know from feel, but I will show you one way of... Sorry, I'm going to come down this way, not drag my rig. We don't drag the kit. If you can pick it up by the lines and the bungees stay on, it's probably tight enough. If you can put a line stow on by hand, it sure as hell is going to come out up there. Like, there is no way you can bungee your lines too tight by hand. Bungees are meant to snap when they're needed to. And in terms of line stow length, sort of 1.5 to 2 inches is recommended. I mean, depending on the configuration of your bag, it might sort of be up to the next grommet. It might be thumb length, depends how big your hands are. And when you're stowing, if you find a bungee which you think, oh, looks a bit rubbish, shall I change it? Just change it. You know, your line stows and your bungees are meant to aid in the staged deployment. If you've got a weak link in the system and you've got one that might potentially snap before the rest of the lines have paid out, you know, you're not going to have a nice opening, and you're opening yourself up to the potential of a malfunction. And an out-of-sequence deployment is not fun. Double stowing bungees, you've just got to find what works for you. It just feels a bit weird at first when you start, but it's just practice. And you'll notice I'm not taking the slack out of the lines there. I did that before the first stow. Now I'm going from bungee stow to bungee stow to try and keep these nice and even. And obviously you'd probably spend a little bit more time over doing this, but for the sakes of the demonstration today, I want to get through to the next bits as well before we run out of time. How am I doing for time, anyone? Okay, so I've got 3 minutes. Oh, God, my knee's killing me. It's the little pack of line stow waddle. Whee! Okay, right, I'll bring the container up. Yeah. Oh, thanks, John. Is that, can you see all right from there? Well. Yeah. Okay, now everything I do in packing has a reason, I have a routine, I have a sequence. If you're going to be doing lots of packing, get into that routine, get into that sequence. It helps in the long run. I do everything that way until I've got it in the bag. Then I do my line stows. Then I come down this way, ready to put it in the container. I never walk away from a pack job at this point. Reasons why? Someone's going to walk past, kick your bag, go, oh, shit. Oh, is it that way? Oh, I'll be fine, and just walk off. It happens. Again, with putting in the container, obviously different manufacturers, different ways of doing it. Use a pull-up, use a packing tool, use a custom-made packing tool, because I don't like the other ones, they feel weird. But at this point, I can now just get that, sit it there, and I'm getting ready to sort everything else out. So pay attention to the closing sequence. Place main risers on top of this flap. If it says that, do that. There's a very good reason. As we said before, the tension on the risers is designed to pay out at a certain point in the deployment. If you tuck your risers under both flaps, it's going to put that out of sequence and you're not going to have as nice an opening. Make sure your risers are stowed in tightly and correctly and snug toggle side in to your container. Placement of lines in the container tray. Do not, I repeat, do not tuck your lines under the bottom of the reserve tray. I'm still seeing people do this on a regular basis. There is a very good reason why you don't. I met a guy out in, I don't know, Herkboogie or something, and he'd had his entire reserve tray ripped out because the lines got caught round the bottom of the container here. Not good. You do not want that. He nearly lost his entire arm and shoulder as it ripped out. I think it was broken, dislocated, broken collarbone. Not fun. So lines go down to the bottom of the container. How much slack? Personal preference. I normally do enough, just do a little S-fold. But either way, I want to make sure they're down that bottom container, little S-fold, and then put our bag into our tray. Now I put it lines down, although we are going to rotate it. The reason I put it lines down is because most containers are designed that as we rotate it, they capture the lines in the bottom of the tray, so you don't have lines sticking out the bottom of your container. Depending on the configuration, you can use the container to aid you in this. So I will lift up on that as I rotate the bag back down, lift and rotate, and that just helps. So it's a wings, so it's bottom, top, right, left. Again, pay attention to what kit you've got and how it's meant to be closed. On this one, the bridle comes out the top right. That's probably the case on most kit. But there are containers now which are recommending the bridle always comes out the bottom. Some rigs like Javelin, it's optional. Some of them it's now mandatory. So again, do go back and check the manufacturer's recommendations on how to close your kit if you're not 100% sure. And in putting the pin in, smiley face or unsmiley face is not as important as pin up. Like, I mean, that's kind of smiley, but if someone pushes on that or you sit down in the plane, it's going to be pushed out. So more importantly, we want it sort of facing upwards to make sure we don't have a pin pulled out prematurely. Now, hopefully, I've got just enough time to teach you my method of closing the pilot chute, or packing the pilot chute. And because I'm silly and because I like to make up rhymes and ways of doing things to help me remember, this is my one. Ooh. Full moon. Jellyfish. Half moon. Why do I pull the apex down? Because basically if you haven't cocked it at this point, you won't be able to do that, so it's a really good way of checking. And also in terms of the bridle paying out and how we stow it, it makes a difference containing everything inside. So our pilot chute comes out as one item and then the bridle pays out from within. So this is really slippery on my leggings. So we've done our fold back up in half again. Fold up our bridle inside. And until recently, I actually always used to do it on the outside because I was convinced it was going to wear out my pilot chute mesh. I have since found out or discovered, I think it was the Brian Germain video that I watched, where the benefit of doing it this way far outweighs the potential of having to replace the mesh on your pilot chute. People probably wear out the mesh on their pilot chute dragging it around the packing room floor more than what the bridle does to it. So just going to fold in to get it nearer to the width of our BOC, a couple of folds, and if needs be, oh sorry, bottom of the container. Okay. Right, obviously a good time to check our BOC, make sure that the elastic is all good and it's tight enough, and just place that in, stow the bridle under the cover, do a quick check, make sure all our flaps are closed, make sure everything is connected as it should be. Is our RSL connected? Are our 3 rings routed properly? Normal pre-flight checks, and we're good to go. Now, I don't think I've got any time to go on, but please come and find me if you guys have got any questions. I'm obviously more than happy to talk about packing for many, many hours. I'm a complete nerd. But yeah, just come and find me. I'll be over on the Romero rigging stand or come and chat to me afterwards. But thanks very much for coming, and I really hope you enjoyed my talk today. Thank you.